traditional high school doesn't give people a lot of opportunity to show their superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my work with teens will be about identifying their thing and prioritizing it outside of school, because they may not be able to do it in school. But for them to know that this is a valuable use of their time, it is a thing they can build a life around.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, in fact, sometimes that's been the most powerful intervention, is this hope for the future that you may hate high school because high school is badly designed for you.
Welcome to another episode of Mental Health in the Age of the Metaverse. I'm your host, Christian Ulstrup. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Adryon Burton Denmark. Dr. Burton Denmark is a clinical psychologist based in Utah. She earned her PhD in counseling psychology from UT Austin and has practiced in Austin, San Francisco, and Salt Lake City. She works with parents and young adults, especially adolescents, in recent years. She practices internal family systems and other mindfulness-based therapies, including hypnosis. She leads a mindfulness-based group for parents, which you can learn more about at her website, linked in the show notes. Adryon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm very glad to have you. So you are on the front lines of what has been referred to as the mental health crisis. What is a topic that you think deserves more attention?
Yes. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about neurodiversity, and especially neurodiversity in adolescents, is because I've been having a clinical experience growing over the past few years, where I will have teens come in, late teens or early 20s, clients coming in with a lot of suicidality. And so I should make it clear, my background and my research was about suicidal ideation and behaviors in college students. It wasn't about autism or ADHD or other forms of neurodiversity. What I was finding with some of these clients who showed up very much like they had been traumatized, like they had serious trauma. And again, I'm also a trauma-informed therapist. That's one of the reasons I love internal family systems and mindfulness-based therapies. I find them very empowering and effective for working with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so with several of these clients, I would feel like, there's got to be some root trauma here for this person to be so distressed, wanting to die, a lot of self-injury, maybe a lot of eating disorder, substance use problems, a lot of severity, and not able to articulate why, what the source of this distress is. So clinically, I would find myself in a state of confusion and a little bit of helplessness. And so what started to happen was me doing a lot of my own research about autism, starting to connect some of the dots, starting to ask the right questions that would then help with a lot of these clients. That was the root cause, right? It wasn't some hidden trauma. It was the fact that being autistic in the world without knowing it, right? Without having a label or a self-concept of that, and without other people knowing it, sort of being treated by your family and treated by your teachers and treated by everyone around you like you're supposed to fit into this neurotypical box. That is traumatizing, right? And the way an autistic person processes information, the world comes at them in ways that are often intense and overwhelming. And so the world is traumatizing. So this inability to articulate, I have also learned talking about feelings, like processing an emotion and putting that into words is also very difficult for people who are autistic. So the whole experience was one of sort of prolonged and chronic trauma, getting to this point of what is typically termed an autistic burnout, right? These are people who were not identified early and who function very well, effectively in many ways and often hide ways in which they're struggling. That term you've probably heard known as masking. And so after so many years of masking, people get to a burnout point. And that was when they were coming into my practice. But then often the suicidal ideation and the self-injury had been going on for years. And
Wow.
the eating disorder, the substance use. So what I found to be really powerful was a new self-concept. If these are female identified people, they would often come with, they'd be diagnosed with anxiety. They might be diagnosed, you can't diagnose a teenager with borderline personality disorder, but would be sort of placed in that category of like borderline traits because you get a lot of those same behaviors. And some would even self-diagnose that way. This is how I feel because I don't know who I am. I don't have a strong sense of myself. I don't feel like I quite fit my body. Is a common thing that I hear. And so having the right formulation saying, oh, wait a second, like, this is what it is. There's nothing wrong with you. A lot of that distress has come from the feeling that something is wrong with me. And that is a message that has been echoed everywhere else in their world. Something is wrong with you. Why are you so weird? And, fit in, or even the person who masks so well that they just sort of disappear and no one knows they're struggling.
Okay. So this is totally fascinating. So just to back up for a second, the research that you were doing, this was for your PhD?
The research on suicide was for my PhD.
Yep. The research on suicide was from your PhD, which was initially an interest. And then the clients that you started seeing, some of whom were suicidal, who were young people, you started noticing that there's a pattern here.
Yes.
Where there is undiagnosed autism in particular. And I just, for the audience, use the term neurodivergent. There's, neuroatypical. Could you define that, and how does autism fit into that, just briefly? Yeah.
How does autism fit into that?
Yeah.
It is a changing and evolving concept.
Okay.
And so neurodiversity, as I've been learning about it, tend to think of that as being autism, ADHD, but also OCD is often grouped in there, or being an HSP, a highly sensitive person. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, what is that?
Concept, different and related. Oh my gosh, I could go off a total other tangent and talk about that. But I guess I'd refer people to like Elaine Aron's research on that, and her book, The Highly Sensitive Person and the Highly Sensitive Child. Because that phenomenon is not a rare phenomenon. It's considered to be about 20% of the population. Humans and other animal species who are deep processors, meaning that they're deep processors of information. They tend to be the kids who are like holding back, watching everything that's going on, taking it all in. They can seem, shy or slow to warm up or fearful. But as adults, they continue to be deep processors. It might take them longer to master something or learn something new. And then when they do, they tend to be far more effective at fully connecting all the dots of this network of things they've learned. But you think of someone like that in our world, right? Our world that has so little nature and so much noise and flashing lights. It can be a really hostile environment for someone like that. So it's often considered to include ASD, ADHD, OCD. Sometimes bipolar is thrown in there as like a different way that brains work. I've even seen borderline personality thrown in there, although that's not really the way I conceptualize it. And being an HSP. There's a great book.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there's a great book called Divergent Mind. And it's specifically about neurodivergence in women. Because that's also, one of the things we were talking about is how traditionally and even still this is overlooked. It's unseen in female-bodied people.
So that's a topic I really want to dig into, because when we first talked, it sounds like there's just, to that question about what's not getting enough attention.
Yeah.
This is a topic that is absolutely not getting enough attention. But to close the loop on sort of the intro, again, because this is totally fascinating, you were basically finding that people who were presenting with these pretty extreme symptoms, suicidality, it wasn't necessarily, if I'm understanding correctly, that there was, I don't know, like traditional trauma in their background,
Yeah.
but it was the fact that they are, and use layman's terms, like wired very differently
Yes.
than, other people, peers, whoever else, that their experience of that world, in which was maybe like designed for those other people or something, was in and of itself traumatic enough for them to become suicidal.
Yes, exactly.
That is wild.
It's that interaction with the outer world. And
Right.
that's where a label becomes very powerful. And, sometimes we think of labels as stigmatizing and negative and should be avoided. However, so the bulk of my research into this area has been reading first-person narratives of people on the spectrum at all different ages. And a theme that comes back again and again is how helpful it was to finally have a label, how they wished they'd had a label much earlier, how they, wish they could go back to their teen self and say, hey, look, nothing's wrong with you. Your brain is wired differently. That's beautiful and wonderful and unique to you. And it's going to cause these challenges. And here are ways you can protect yourself and advocate for yourself. It changes everything. Yeah. From this sort of like, I feel like I'm broken or something's wrong with me, or like I'm an alien visiting this foreign culture, which could even be your family, right? I feel like an alien in my own family, but I don't have the words for it. And so what would you do except get anxious and depressed?
Yeah. I mean, the way you describe that, feeling like an alien, I mean, that's pretty extreme. And you mentioned in the context of your family, are these sort of this group of various diagnoses, or this kind of neuroatypical traits? Is that not heritable?
Oh, it's highly, highly heritable. That's
okay. Okay.
So it's about as heritable as like height, which is one of the more heritable things. So 50% to 75% heritability index is what I've heard, which is very high. Like things with schizophrenia are about 50%. And so yes, if you are on the spectrum, you probably have a relative on the spectrum also. But that often hasn't been recognized, right? If it's the older generation, if it's a male relative, maybe they're seen as eccentric or odd, that eccentric professor type figure, kind of our stereotypes about that, or the emotionless engineer. We have a lot of stereotypes that encompass traditionally male autism. If it was a female relative, she may have been medicated for anxiety or depression, or been labeled borderline personality disorder, or she may have masked it always, right? And therefore been unavailable as a role model of how to live in the world this way.
So it sounds like this has been going on for generations.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So when people talk about what's happening with like the increase in diagnosis, and this used to be, I don't know, put it like 1% of the population, and it's kind of now 2.5, 3, 4 to 5% of the population, right? You're getting significant increases in people being diagnosed. It is not understood to be any real change in what environment. That it's really a cultural and sociological phenomenon, that we have changed our conceptualization of it. So when the diagnostic criteria change, then you get changes in the number of people diagnosed. and then awareness of it. And that's, where you and I'll get into talking about online resources. Yes. And how people can learn about this for themselves and even start to recognize themselves where a therapist might completely miss it. And so self-diagnosis becoming a possibility now that there are a lot of autistic people or neurodivergent people, people talking about their ADHD, people talking about their OCD, on TikTok, on YouTube, that you can tune into someone talking about their lived experience. And then a professional can be a confirming voice, but really this is based off a person's lived experience in the world. When I talk to people about a diagnosis, I try to stay really humble with it. Like, I am not the expert on this. You are the expert on this. This is your life. This is your experience. I can share how this fits into, this picture that I'm aware of. Right. But I really encourage people to do their own reading or, get on TikTok and watch some of these channels or get on YouTube. There's a lot of good stuff out there. And so the more people are exposed to other voices, the more they can have a sense of, yes, this fits me, or no, it doesn't. And so I can be the one who planted the seed. But I don't see myself as like some, higher up professional being like, here, I'm going to stamp you with a label. That's not what that process is like at all. Yeah.
So in I'm sure there are no typical clients or typical cases, but, let's say you have a client come in who's in their early 20s, who they present with some of these symptoms, and you have a hunch that perhaps they are autistic or neuroatypical. And this, you present that to them as a potential option.
Yeah.
What is the path towards becoming sort of more well from there?
Yeah. What is the path? Because it's interesting. As much as I've read people say that diagnosis changed my life, there's usually a period of like, wait, what? Like, no, because there are still so many stereotypes, sort of I don't think so, or I don't want to talk about it. Like, that doesn't sound, I'm not okay with this, is sort of often an initial response, not always. Maybe about half the time for me, it's that. And then half the time it's, yeah, I've thought that too, and it really depends on how savvy the person is, how much they've been exposed to information about neurodiversity. And, so that has a lot to do with what they've been looking at online and who they know and what their friends talk about. So for some people, that feels wonderful for me to say that. It feels confirming. Like, yep, I've pretty much thought about that. I've even talked about it with my best friend. I just, no one else has ever said that to me. No teachers, no parents. So it feels good to have an adult say, hey, this might be you. And then, for the other half who it's like, well, no, that can't be me because, I don't flap my hands and I started speaking early and I, haven't ever struggled academically, things like that, or even I'm not a math genius, so that can't be me, all the different stereotypes. So let's see. So for those people who resist it, it's never ended up where that has stayed the case. It's usually I need to sit with this and then we back off it and we talk about other things and it sort of settles and then we can use that. And so it has been like this linchpin for me clinically. It has been usually the thing that helps everything else slip into focus in a different way. So if I'm working, with a professional, now we can start talking about how do you advocate for yourself in the workplace? How can you start unmasking? Where and when and how would it be safe to talk to your colleagues or talk to your boss, ask for the support you need? Because a lot of companies now do have, employee groups around neurodiversity. Some are better than others, I hear. And if you're talking about a high school student, then they're eligible for accommodations through that. And so, they can get things that will help them. A lot of the same things that help someone with ADHD will help someone with autism, like reduced distraction, testing environments, and extended time. Because what doesn't help any of these people is high pressure, high stress. They're already under stress all day. Just showing up in a classroom with fluorescent lights and the clock ticking and all these people around them and all their emotions going on and all the social subtext that's happening. It's so stressful. I can't, understate that enough. Overstate that enough. When I talk to parents, I'm trying to help them build empathy for their teen of what their life is like. And that just showing up at school is really, really hard. And, some of these kids aren't showing up at school. It's so overwhelming, that they're not. And so it helps to structure their schedule so they have free periods between classes. And, it helps for them to be able to take lighter course loads and get some of their classes, have some of them online. Because for some of these kids, doing school online was actually a lot better. If they didn't have to be on Zoom with their camera turned on, because that's really stressful for a lot of these kids. But if they didn't have to do that, then the online coursework was often easier to manage. They could focus in on the content without all the other things that happen when you stick a kid in school.
So you mentioned a few different things in terms of what somebody who's autistic, an environment that they would maybe do better in, right? Or at the very least, not incur this level of trauma that's going to make them suicidal. What is at the root of those differences? You mentioned sort of like information processing, like what's going on?
Yeah. And this is where I'm not the expert. I'm not the neurologist, but I can tell you that with this broad neurodivergence, but a lot of it does have to do with how information is taken in and processed. There's not a consistent way that happens. There's not a template for everyone with autism or everyone with ADHD. But because you'll get these people who are able to hyper focus in on certain things, on subject areas of interest, for example. And that's where you get that kind of classic, special deep knowledge interests is one of the things associated with it. But then it's very, very difficult to switch focus often, or to switch to things and try and focus on things that are not intrinsically interesting. And so overstimulated, understimulated is a constant battle, right? Where some people are more sensitive to noise, or they are very, very sensitive to texture and touch. These are common ones. And so just the act of having to wear anything that's not their preferred outfit, something soft, everyone has their sort of preferred way of dressing. But if parents force their kids to dress appropriately, and don't understand why they're having fits about wearing a skirt or wearing a sweater, because if you're neurotypical, you don't understand that feels like an assault, right? It's being stabbed with needles, right? The sensations are more intense. So that can be sensory. It can be visual, sensitive to a lot of noise, a lot going on in the visual field, flickering lights, neurotypical brains are really good at filtering out most of what goes on. We filter out most of what goes on. And then we can focus in on certain things. And what we love to focus in on are social interactions. And so neuroatypical brains don't filter, meaning don't filter the same, right? And they don't filter nearly as much, meaning that, while also trying to hold this conversation, the AC kicked on in my space, You might have heard of
Mhm.
it in the background, but you and I probably just ignored it. That could be an overwhelming, distracting noise, no longer able to have this conversation because of what happened in the environment. Because I'm distracted by that, or I'm distracted by this noise, or I'm distracted by, an internal state, or I'm distracted by someone being in a bad mood next to me. It's really hard to filter that stuff out.
Mhm. How much of that is fixed? Because when I got very into meditation, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little too into it. But I noticed that in training your attention, kind of going through those exercises, my ability to focus and not be distracted by things did seem to be flexible. I'm wondering if for the clients who you work with, is that something where, because it's sort of part of who they are, there's not a lot of flexibility, or is that something that you can work with them on if they want to change?
The brain will filter differently than it does.
Okay.
And yet attention, right, is a different thing. Attention is a conscious process. And so, yes, I definitely meditate with these clients. And most find it helpful, right? Some aren't willing to, but most are willing to, and most find it helpful to some degree. And that works better with guided meditation on your own. And so that can train and build attention and that ability to direct it, but it won't change filtering. So you're still getting an overload of information in most settings, which is actually, and sort of jumping ahead a little bit to this idea of how online spaces can be really helpful. When you're communicating with someone online, you're removing so much of that extraneous information, or things that would be very distracting. And so in some ways it can become much easier to communicate. There still may be subtext lost. But online relationships can feel easier and more satisfying, and like they can understand people better because they're able to take time, express themselves, and not get distracted by that weird look that crossed someone's face, and not get distracted by all the millions of things going on around them in the conversation.
Makes sense. I think there was an article that was published in the late 90s, maybe as early as 97, I think in the New York Times, about how, the internet and cyberspace was going to be this, massive boon to autistic people. So that was, clearly something that was recognized pretty early on. And now, we have virtual reality and immersive experiences and everything we could talk about in a second. But before we get there, one topic in particular that we had talked about before, I think it'd be good to dive into, is neuroatypical autistic girls and how they're not getting enough attention. What's going on?
So what's going on? I don't want to divide it as cleanly as like male type autism and female type autism. That's not really true, and certainly have a number of male bodied clients who manifest more the way we think of female autism, right? And vice versa. But a lot of what happens with girls, they certainly are less likely to fit that stereotype of, I don't know, the boy who is constantly talking about their special interests, is going to tell you every single thing that there has ever been true about construction equipment, or and seems kind of oblivious to other people's responses, and maybe a little bit not caring, right? Like, sort of like, well, this is how I am, and this is what I like, and if you're not into it, I don't care. Like, I'll go find somebody who wants to talk about that. That is much less true of girls or female-bodied people. I want to make that distinction because there's also, it's much more common for autistic people to be trans or non-binary, to experience gender differently. And so that can be part of that feeling of like, I don't feel right in my body, or I don't feel like this is my body. Or I experience some kind of mismatch with my physical form. Gender can be an aspect of that. But so when someone looks at someone and thinks they're a girl, they're generally seeing someone who's been, trained, just socialized to try and get along with others and, to express interest in what others are doing. And, so one of the pressures that falls more on female-bodied people is that they are expected to be able to navigate social situations, with more grace. They're expected to be more adept at that, more tuned in than their peers. So that is an extra layer of pressure that can become overwhelming for these teen girls. And then they also have an internal pressure, right? To mask, to get along, to not let anyone know what's going on with them. And they tend to observe really well how other people are interacting and then play it out like a script. So often the experience is like they're taking on a role. In fact, might feel very comfortable being an actress, being on stage, because taking a role has come so easily. They're watching how other people do it, how other girls are doing it. And then they're doing all the same things, which is one of the reasons nobody knows. That inside they feel very, very different. So they tend to be socialized to be better at masking, rewarded for masking, and then expected to behave differently. And with boys, just culturally, traditionally, we've allowed a much wider range. For boys, it's far more acceptable to be obsessive about their special interests. I have 2 boys myself, and their ages 9 and 6. And when they get together with their other little boy friends, they're obsessively talking about Pokemon, and sometimes other video games, right? But like this deep obsession, and that's all they talk about, and it's not considered unusual, right? Already at about this age that my 9-year-old is, that is much less common among girls, where previously they might. And there are sort of like girl interests, right? Like maybe they can talk obsessively about Harry Potter. But even now that's starting to be rejected by their peers. Of like, so neurotypical and neurodivergent boys have a lot of space to be, kind of focused on single things and dive deep into their special interests and talk a lot about it and find communities. My brothers played, different video games. They also played Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, where that's really supported, and that has not traditionally been supported. It's been much harder for girls to get by socially if what they really want to do is talk about special interests. And it may be Disney princesses, and it may be horses, and it may be things that are socially acceptable, but the level at which they want to focus in on it is typically not well supported for girls.
So would it be fair to say then the negative consequences or even trauma that occurs to somebody who is undiagnosed or doesn't realize that they have these autistic traits or neuroatypical traits is that because of the social pressures of the environments that they find themselves in, they start to adapt to it through like heuristics, basically, right? Like kind of figuring out how to fit the expectations of others. And then that comes at the expense of their own well-being, energy. That makes sense. I guess I'd be curious how you think about what a sort of healthy balance is then, because if you're part of a society or a family, it's always a little bit of give and take, right? So
Exactly.
how do you help clients figure out what the right balance is between asking other people to meet them where they are versus being willing to meet other people at those different levels?
Yeah. You're right. And And that will always be, there will need to be some level of adaptation, for sure. And so, so the strategies we talk about are like finding the safe places, the safe people, the safe places where you can be yourself. The first step when you say like, how much do you ask people to meet me where I am? The first step is to explain where you are. That the people who love you and have been near to you probably have no concept of where you are, of what life is like for you. And so first explaining where you are, what types of things are really hard for you. Also, if you're talking about this in a workplace, you might not be vulnerable like that, but, I do encourage people to say, so I struggle with this in particular, and this makes me really good at this. Like to, focus on strengths, also the superpowers that neurodivergent brings. And when a manager, for example, knows that about you, then they're going to help you play to your superpowers and not do so many of the things that erode your sense of well-being. And you're not very good at. And you could spend more of your time doing the things that feel really good and you're really good at.
Right. So what are some of those superpowers?
Well, so hyperfocus is one of them, right? And pattern detection, right? If you're taking in a ton of information, then, and this really depends on the person, right? Some people's superpowers are artistic expression, and some people's superpowers are athletic performance, and some people's superpowers, are that they can spot patterns in data that are much harder for other people to spot, and they can pull that out, and or that they can get deeply immersed, in coding, for example, and do this for hours and hours on end, kind of tunneled in, right? That's a superpower that all those meetings that pop up during the day is a distraction from.
Right.
And so traditional high school doesn't give people a lot of opportunity to show their superpowers. And so a lot of my work with teens will be about identifying their thing and prioritizing it outside of school, because they may not be able to do it in school. But for them to know that this is a valuable use of their time, it is a thing they can build a life around. And yeah, in fact, sometimes that's been the most powerful intervention, is this hope for the future that you may hate high school, because high school is badly designed for you, right? It's a bad environment. It's never going to be a good fit. But you can get through it and you can be an author, right? If what you want to do is right, you can do that. Yeah. Because often there's a sense of like, how can I make my way in the world, especially if high school is going badly? You've got the kids who are doing great, they're nailing it, they're just under a lot of emotional stress, and you've got the kids who are really, failing their classes, barely hanging on, often incredibly bright, but high school doesn't fit them at all. And so a big part of our work is helping identify what the superpower is. But yes, it varies from person to person, but it often taps into that ability to gain deep encyclopedic knowledge in, often several subjects. So a lot of people have a deep interest, and it may be just one at a time, or it may be several at a time, and then they will change over the course of the lifespan. We just fascinating.
That makes a ton of sense. Now this kind of begs the question of like, who is high school good for? But it's interesting, right? Because if, like, in our program, part of our programming, like the very first chapter of the curriculum with the kids is, what is your superpower? So having them think about it. So we assume everybody has one, to different degrees, and it's kind of interesting to think about, almost like through a historical lens. Education, let's say as an example, has sort of trended towards homogeneity. where it's everybody has the same structure, same subjects. You have this like core curriculum, and the way in which the information is delivered is sort of the same across the board.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you personally think that there might be some correlation there between the trend towards homogeneity, let's say in education, and some of these negative side effects that, seem to be increasing.
Yes.
When it comes to mental health and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Because,
Yeah.
and then I think some more novel approaches to education that are trying to turn away from that into more project-based learning and into, helping students develop their own learning agenda. But that is so rare. Yeah. Mostly we've got a standardized curriculum and homogeneity. And I would say it's bad for most people and it's worse for neurodivergent people. Right.
Right.
Yeah. There aren't that many people that it's good for. I mean, I was an example of a kid who did fine in high school.
Sure.
I'm neurotypical. Classes came pretty easily. When someone said, do all these steps of homework, I'd be like, all right, I'll do all these steps of homework. It's boring, but it didn't destroy my soul to do it.
Right.
And so that's kind of the best case scenario. Yeah. I mean, with that standardized, but really the best case scenario is more individualized learning.
Yeah.
But then you can't have all these standardized assessments, to say like, where are we? It doesn't work very well with the things that we've prioritized politically.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And this is probably a good segue to talking about technology and information technology a little bit. The promise of the internet and every, sort of this wide array of different enabling technologies that we've been enjoying over the last 20 years and will continue to going forward is that there's a much higher degree of personalization that's possible.
Yeah.
Now there's a dark side to that. But, I want to, at least for now, like kind of focus on one of the things that's potentially good, which you mentioned earlier, which is, with immersive experiences as an example for folks for whom it's really important, especially important to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
This is something that affords you as a therapist and them as a client to kind of tune things in such a way that it's potentially a better fit.
Yeah.
You've used virtual reality in clinical practice. I would love to hear how that's gone.
Yeah. So I have really, really enjoyed it. And, partly because for me, it's novel. But, that for even for me during the pandemic, all this like, talking head to talking head, faces on a screen got really depleting.
Yeah.
Now, my preference is always to have someone in my office if I can. But I do, treat people who can't make it into the office. Interestingly enough, teenagers overwhelmingly prefer being in person in my practice. You'd think, this tech savvy generation would want to do it remotely, but for the most part, they don't. In fact, a lot of them would forego their sessions if they can't be in person. Just in my practice, they like coming into a space where they know they have privacy and they know they're out of their house and they know their parents can't listen. But we made it work, and the virtual reality space was so much more enjoyable to meet in. It provided some areas of interest, right? So being able to explore the different environments is a great way to engage. But I used it with people who I had pre-existing relationships with. So I wasn't at that beginning phase of therapy where I could see it being really helpful, right? With the new teen client, to kind of walk and talk in the virtual space, to explore as a way of them getting more comfortable in a therapeutic relationship. But I ended up using it with people who I already had a relationship with. And what that has done, especially for folks who've stuck with it, and wanted to keep meeting is in VR is that it's a really lovely environment. So the fact that you can hear nature noises is big, and the fact that the screen is full of visual interest, right? And that it's not a person's face, because a person's face for a lot of autistic people is one of the most overwhelming things that there is. Because of, all the different ways that emotion is communicated through the face. So to just strip that away, to be able to hear each other's voices, to be able to have these little avatars that are moving together through the space, or just sitting together talking, and to be able to hear the noise of the wind, and the noise of birds, the noise of water, is very soothing when you think about what's bad about high school. Right. The worst thing about high school is probably its physical structure. And, because what humans need is a lot of nature. What we need is the sky and the leaves and the wind and the grass. Like, that's what heals us. That's what makes us whole. So I love about the virtual reality that you can get an aspect of that. You can feel like you're more outside. You can feel like you're in nature and get some of that healing effect. If otherwise your choice was to be looking at their face on a screen, it's a much nicer place to be.
Not quite the real thing, but
it's
at
not
least
quite the real thing. And that's why, in my mind, reality always has a place, but it's the reality of finding nature is what people do. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. A step back on the bridge back to reality, as we like to say. So you have two sons,
I do.
You said, and they are 6 and 9.
That's right.
Okay, so they're not quite on social media. They're not teenagers. They don't have
phone.
The no phone. So they're not quite in the metaverse yet, but. Unless you're sort of unplugging and moving to the woods, which I think a lot of parents would like to do, they will be exposed to more technology. And so in your role as a mom raising kids in the digital age, how do you think about exposing them to technology or having them cultivate a healthy relationship, especially as they get older?
Yeah. And that is on my mind a lot. And it's on the mind of all the other parents I talk to who aren't psychologists. They are also thinking a lot about this. And before I get into that, I do want to just throw in there, we've talked about the benefits of technology.
Yeah.
I think for teen girls in particular, the benefits of being able to hear other people's experiences, feel like you're part of a community, find a community online. The internet's all about sharing special interests. And you can do that anonymously, and you can do that in that way that is celebrated and supported. You can geek out about any subject as particular as you want. There are some big risks that come for all children. I'm thinking about them for my children, but also for neurodivergent teen girls in particular, because one of the things that they're not very good at is lying or detecting lies, right? Like, communication tends to be pretty straightforward. And that tends to be one of the reasons that girls will struggle more with their peer relationships with boys, because at certain ages, generalizing, but girls' social communications are more complex, and they'll do kind of rapidly shifting in-group, out-group, not invited anymore, shifting alliances, and lying. Often boys don't get into that nearly as much. And so bullying can be hard to recognize for a teen on the spectrum. When they're being made fun of, it can be hard to know. There's sort of a bad feeling, but also the underlying subtext is missed. And so bullying online is also a problem. And then like spotting predators online, basically, like people who are lying to you. That's not the default assumption, because autistic people don't tend to lie. They don't think other people are lying either. And so, like one of my clients did have a situation where she had early and unlimited exposure to an iPad, and through some app, was, some predator had contacted her. There was a lot of grooming behavior and then sending of inappropriate photos, stuff that the parents clearly did not know was going on. Right. And so my line to parents and what I plan to do myself, it might sound kind of radical, but I want my kids to know that they don't have any privacy online, that any illusion of privacy online is just an illusion. And that is what how I'm going to justify that I am going to look through their phone and I am going to look through their apps, because it's my job to remind them, not to get fooled by that. It's so easy to think you sent a text to a friend and that text is just going to stay between you.
Right.
But anybody can screenshot that. They can share it with anyone else at any time. And so, just that I hope, if I am periodically monitoring their communication, not in a sneaky way, hey, it's time for me to look at the phone. That phone, by the way, is my phone. It's not their phone. We're not going to call it their phone, right? It's a phone that I own that they get to use. And I am going to look through it. And I'm going to look through all the apps they use. And that way, I'm hoping that they will never send anything that they are not okay with me seeing, that they will never send anything that they are not okay with their friend's parent seeing. And that they will just start to understand that that's not a private space. You want to have a private conversation, you get together face to face or you give them a call, right? Like there are ways you can have a private conversation. This is not one of them. And they may resent that, but I try and explain it to parents. And actually I've had teenagers be pretty receptive to that.
Yeah.
It is not just that your parent is, looking out for your safety, right? In the case of this teen girl, she needed her parents to step in and monitor her communication. And that wasn't happening.
Right.
They didn't know. And so, it was a really bad situation. But, just even with the things kids say about each other, right? Just for them to know that you can't assume that's private. It feels private, but it's not. You could easily go anywhere. Don't put it down in writing. My girlfriends and I'm still close friends with several of my friends from high school. And we constantly talk about how grateful we are that there was no social media in those days. Just like, saved by the absence of that, because, kids get together and they say terrible things about each other. But when they do that in the online space, there's a permanent record of it and it will get back to that person. And so that's the main thing that I do with my kids in terms of that, like bullying risk and risk for predatory behavior. The other thing I'm doing with my 9-year-old already is I'm talking about addiction broadly. I'm talking about things that are so appealing or that feel so good that your brain just wants more of that. And he does get to play video games. So we have a context to talk about that with. But then how, if you were to just do that and, never go out and play, how you would lose out, your life would shrink. And it would shrink to this thing that your brain is like, yes, 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 I want more of that. But your life overall would shrink and it wouldn't be a good life anymore. So
how do you get a preteen to understand that?
So preteens are perfect because, right? It's perfect to talk about your kid at this age, 9, 10, 11. They can process complex topics and information and really engage in these discussions. And they're not old enough yet that like, Mom, you don't know anything. Like, Mom, you don't get it. He hasn't tuned me out yet. We still have a really, I hope we always have a good relationship, but we still have a really open channel of communication that I know is going to narrow when he gets older because he's going to be far more interested in that one about what his peers think and not very interested in what I think. And that's normal. That's appropriate. So I want to get it in there now. I want to lay a foundation now of how these things can be problems. So now I'm talking with my 9-year-old about alcohol and about marijuana, and about screens and about phone addiction. We talk about people we know who are sort of more addicted to their phones, right? And less, right? And how what's on those phones can be so appealing to your brain that it feels better than reality. But then you lose out. And he can see that now because, he loves to get out in the world. That he would lose that if he were to leave reality and just spend time with a device and just connect with friends that way.
Yeah. So, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of parents listening, and I myself hoping to have a family not too long. It sounds like there's this critical period then where, it's much better to get ahead of things, right? Especially before the kids are kind of out on their own. Yeah. I think, something that we've observed firsthand and is kind of in the zeitgeist is, unfortunately, there are a lot of teenagers and young adults things have kind of gone off the rails when it comes to technology use, whether that's video games or social media or pornography. I mean, there are a lot of sort of dangers out there in cyberspace. For a parent who has a kid who's sort of at that point, I guess, do you have any advice for them? How would you think about that?
It's never too late. You're right. It is better to get in earlier. And along those lines, it's also better if you can stave off them getting access to the technology. So just like the earlier they try alcohol or marijuana, the more likely they are to have a problem with it. The earlier they get their phone, the more likely they are to have a problem with it. And that just has to do with brain development. So the further you can push it. So my other strategy as a parent is to form a coalition with other parents. And so we are not going to get our kids' phones until this age. Now, I'm advocating that we push it until 16, that they drive first and then get a smartphone, right? Before that, they can have communication devices,
Sure.
My 9-year-old already has one of those Gab watches because I want to be able to keep track of him on the ski slopes, so that he can contact me and I can GPS track him. But he can't access the internet. He can't text anybody. He can't do anything else with it.
Right.
And so I think there's more and more stuff like that that's emerging, sort of dumb phones for teens, rather than getting them the internet at their fingertips all the time. Their brains are not remotely developed enough to handle that. I mean, our brains really aren't that well adapted to it. So, so that's one of the strategies is to, at least like with their close friends, get in contact with those parents if you can, and talk about, when you're going to get phones together. And that way they're not the only kid who doesn't have it.
Right.
So I know not everyone can use that strategy, but I recommend that if you can, team up with the people around them because, as they get older and older, what they're most motivated by is what their peers are doing. And so if you can, sort of help them not be in a situation where they're the only one who doesn't have a phone.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think there's, it sounds like a lot of kind of perennial insight in there too, where, get ahead of it before, have the tough conversations beforehand. Two is, it's interesting. There's kind of this gradation, it sounds like, between full-fledged access to the internet and none at all, where you can have varying levels of controls. Shout out to Apple for doing a pretty good job of starting to implement some of this stuff. And then three is if you can construct a social environment of some kind, or help build one that's conducive to healthy those healthy relationships. Sound like three great things. Now, of course, I don't know what it was like for you, but it's like there's always that one kid in the neighborhood whose parents are, willing to let them do whatever they want.
Yeah. But as long as it's not everyone they know, it won't be the same for them.
Right. So as long as that's an edge case, basically.
Yeah. And so then 4, once they have the device, and, it's generally traveling around with them all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You implement ideally some home policies around where
Right.
those devices get docked, that they don't spend the night with them, that they aren't their alarm clock, they don't sleep next to their bed,
Yeah.
that the devices get docked. You've got to do the same as a parent, of course, if you want your kids to do that, which is good for everybody, right? To have cutoff time, to have a place where all those devices go. Because of course, the worst stuff that happens to kids online is happening at 2, 3 in the morning. That's when they're getting into big trouble with it. It's not usually during the day. So it's robbing them of sleep, and, they're getting into trouble, sneaking out. I mean, things kids do. And so that helps a lot. And then I will be monitoring. This is not private, to step in there. And so that's something parents can do even now, right? If their kids already have a phone, and they're feeling like, oh no, like I wish I could back up time. Be like, okay, just like focus on what you can do going forward. And so,
Right.
Going forward, have a family meeting, say like, we're going to review the way we all use technology, right? We're going to look at our screen time, and we're going to look at our screen time for various apps, right? Like you said, Apple can show you all this stuff. You can set limits on it. And, you can also just look at it for information gathering. And if the parents can be transparent and open with this and realize, like, I just learned that it's really disruptive to sleep to have your phone in your bedroom. So, we're going to focus on sleep this month, and all of us are going to keep our phones outside of our bedrooms. And you can always implement that. Like, it's time for me to start looking at what's going on, even if you haven't done it before. You can expect, of course, big pushback, and it's worth it. That's also going to be my line as a parent ultimately, right? I want a good relationship with my kids, but I'm not their friend, right? I'm here to guide and protect them. And while I do think the guardrails need to move back the older they get, right? That there need to be guardrails. And they may not like them, and that is okay.
And sort of as you mentioned, and I'm chuckling a little bit, this is going to be a lot more digestible to the kids if they see the parents modeling those good habits. That's my experience. That's there are a lot of adults who could benefit from changing.
If a parent can talk about their own struggle with it, and how they've seen it valuable to cut back and how hard it is for them. I mean, just if a parent can be in the struggle with them, kids are way more receptive.
Cool. Well, one last question I always have fun with, and you alluded to this earlier, but as technology is getting better, especially over the next 5, 10, 15 years with whatever happens with VR, AR, AI, all this kind of stuff, the digital experiences are going to be more compelling, more personalized, more accessible, and the line between reality and virtual reality is going to get increasingly blurry for a lot of folks. That is the case now. Can you still make a case for reality in, let's say, 2035?
Yeah. So my biggest case for reality that harkens back to something I said earlier is that people need nature, right? For physical and emotional health. There's a bunch of research about this, just even they've done city mapping, and like the closer people live to green spaces, the better their physical health outcomes are, as well as mental health outcomes. People need nature, and you can't really recreate it in virtual reality. You can create different naturescapes that might be better than other technology alternatives, right? Better than institutional buildings, right? But there is no substitute for getting out there on the mountain and getting out there, by the water and getting out there. And so that's why I think there's always going to be a case for reality. I hope, that that we never lose that connection. In fact, I hope that it strengthens it, that there's a way in which, relationships, I think, can become more real and more satisfying. In a VR space, your brain does respond better. Like when you're FaceTiming, talking on the phone, or communicating in VR, the social part of your brain is actually getting its needs met, as opposed to texting and chatting through apps. That really does, right? Like posting on Instagram doesn't do anything for your social brain, and reading about it doesn't do anything either. It's like the equivalent of fake sugars, It makes you think you're getting social connection, but you're actually not getting it at all. But so VR has that potential to actually be more deeply satisfying, and still people need those face-to-face connections. Not a lot of them, but a few for emotional wellness. We need that. So we need to be around other people, and we need to be in nature, and that it's always going to be true. So I hope we always prioritize that.
Yeah. Never quite, reaches parity with the real thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
There might be some other people who feel differently, but
there may be. And I think it's a wonderful, improvement on what we've got now, right? It can lead to more interaction. It can lead to better interaction. But that doesn't mean it should replace the real thing.
Yeah. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Adryon, thank you so much for joining me for the last hour and a half. I want to make sure that folks who are listening know that they can see what you're up to at burtondenmarkcounseling.com. You do have a wait list of clients at the moment, most of whom the clients you work with are in Utah.
Yes.
And you are not on social media.
I'm not at all. Not even
no social media to plug. Probably long-term healthy, correct decision to make. So bravo.
Well, it makes me happy.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Adryon. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for coming on.